Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Good morning. My name is Hillary Stevens. I'm the Coastal Resilience Senior Manager here at Restore America's Estuaries, and I'd like to welcome you to our webinar for this week, which is National Estuaries Week. I know this is a highlight of your annual calendar just as much as it is ours, and thank you for coming and celebrating with us today. If you're not familiar with RAE, we are a national alliance of 10 member groups that are located around the country. You'll see on this map here. We serve as an advocate and a convener for them. We're based in Washington, D.C., and we offer programming such as this to serve folks working in their coastal areas around the country. I'd like to remind you that our biennial Coastal and Estuarine Summit is coming up this December in New Orleans. Registration is open now, and in fact, we are getting close to the early bird deadline of October 7th. Hotel rooms are filling up and some of the field trips are already at capacity, and so please do make sure to get registered quickly to make sure to hold your spot. We have a couple of upcoming events I'd like to call your attention to. Our webinar for next month will be on October 20th, and that is featuring the Elizabeth River Project Environmental Justice Tool, and that's based in Virginia. Should be a fascinating talk, so we're very much looking forward to that. And again, to remind you, the summit will be in December 4th through the 8th in New Orleans. So this is National Estuaries Week. We want to send a huge thanks to our partners, NOAA, NERA, the National Estuarine Research Reserve Association, and ANEP, the Association of National Estuary Programs. These are our buddies, and they celebrate with us every year as we come together with 35 national events across 11 coastal states with thousands of participants taking part in different events to raise awareness and public interest in our estuaries. We want to offer a special thank you to all of the members of Congress who participated in the resolution this year, and you'll see them listed here. And as you'll see, they really are a very geographically diverse bunch, and we really appreciate their ongoing support. With that, let me move right ahead and announce our speakers for today. Our first speaker will be Isabelle Stinette, who is the Restoration Manager of the New York-New Jersey Harbor and Estuary Program. She works with partner agencies to further habitat restoration and monitoring efforts and runs the Interagency Restoration Working Group. Isabelle has a master's in marine science and a bachelor's in environmental studies and writing. Our second speaker today is Deanna Erickson, who is the director of the Lake Superior National Estuarine Research Reserve. She's worked on the St. Louis River Estuary in education and programmatic leadership since 2011. She holds a Bachelor of Science in Natural Resource Management from the University of Wisconsin at Stevens Point and a Master of Ed from the University of Minnesota Duluth, and has worked and volunteered in conservation, natural resource management, and environmental education since 1998. We are very, very happy to welcome both of you. And with that, let me give the screen over to Isabelle.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. Just give me 1 second to share my screen. I'll be right with you. Okay. Great. I look okay? Great. Thanks. Yes, I'm Isabelle Stinette. I'm the Restoration Manager, the New York-New Jersey Harbor and Estuary Program, and the Hudson River Foundation. And as Hillary said, my project is called Aquatic Connectivity Through Climate-Ready Infrastructure. So I'll just go into that project a little bit more, and happy to be with you. And I'll share a little bit about the Harbor and Estuary Program and then my project, and then go into some of our interim results. So just if you weren't familiar with the New York-New Jersey Harbor and Estuary Program, this is where we operate. So we're based out of the Lower Hudson and Lower Hudson in New York and Lower Raritan and Hudson Rivers in New Jersey. So we are a bi-state organization. We are one of the nation's 28 national estuary programs, and we're managed in partnership with the Hudson River Foundation, which is a nonprofit foundation that funds scientific research for the Hudson River. I wanted to say that my project is focused largely in New Jersey. And the reason I chose to do so in New Jersey is there's already a fantastic assessment program for tributary connections in the lower Hudson Valley through our sister agency, the Hudson River Estuary Program. So feel free to check out their efforts as well. But my project focus is in New Jersey. So what the project is looking at bridges and culverts through two lenses. So those two lenses are aquatic connectivity. So aquatic connectivity is how well that these structures can pass fish and other aquatic life through and under them. And then you can take the same data and look at it through the lens of hydraulic capacity. So are these bridges and culverts sized correctly so they're not creating localized flooding, which is a big problem in our area, and erosional issues. So I use these kind of two data sets to bring these both together and make a prioritization scheme. And I'm able to give that prioritization out to stakeholders to try to make informed management decisions about what to do with this infrastructure. So if you haven't heard of the North Atlantic Aquatic Connectivity Collaborative, I encourage you to check them out. It's a really widespread throughout the Northeast set of protocols that a lot of people are using, which is really standardizing the data in a really nice way. They've created these specific protocols for assessing road stream crossings. They've developed a whole training methodology to train assessors, and they also have a publicly accessible database that's really great as well. And for the hydraulic capacity data, I used a model that was developed by the Water Resource Institute at Cornell. And that's also a publicly accessible model. It's on ArcGIS, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a minute. So this is probably not news to a lot of you guys, but we're looking at what do fish like. They like more habitat and they like good quality habitat. And my project is, it works for both anadromous fish, that's fish that spend part of their life cycle out in the ocean, and patadromous fish. Those are fish that are in freshwater streams, but do need to migrate up and down throughout the habitat. So the NAC protocols look at, they look at what the substrate is in the crossing structure. They look at the velocity. If there's a drop, fish don't like having to jump up the falls. And is there adequate light and adequate depth? So those are kind of most of the main factors that kind of go into the NAC assessments. For hydraulic capacity, I included this, just a snapshot here from the Cornell Water Resources Institute website, but they have a really great video. I encourage you to go check it out. And it's basically showing this, a physical model of a stream and what happens to the stream when you put an undersized culvert in it. And you can kind of see from this picture that, you know, with the increased velocity, you get a big scour pool at the outlet, and you get a lot of erosion of the banks and the inlet side. So it's really just a really great demonstration. So this model that they've developed, it's made to be used directly with the data that comes out of the aquatic assessment protocol, the NAC data, and it takes that data into this GIS model, and then you add precipitation data and elevation data, and it basically spits out your maximum storm interval that particular crossing can accommodate. So that'll be your 100-year storm event, if you heard your 50-year storm event, et cetera, and that's you can see from the slide, it's lines up with the probability of that kind of storm happening in a given year. And another great thing about this model is not only does it give you for current precipitation scenarios, but it also projects into future precipitation scenarios. So you can see how these particular culverts and bridges are looking for future with climate change. So this map shows the area where in New Jersey where the Harbor and Estuary Program works. So the first thing I said to myself is, where do I start? So I turned to a lot of other great resources from different conservation organizations and tried to put together I broke the whole area down by the Huck 14 sub-watersheds and tried to prioritize them. And you can see from this map, it's just going by percentiles, and the kind of redder areas are the higher priority and the dark blue areas are the lower priority. So I used in that prioritization, I used all these different data sets over here, two of which I want to specifically call out that's kind of unique to our program. One, I kind of prioritized watersheds that were within the head of tide, because our program really makes a point of trying to address first barriers for anadromous fish. And the other one I wanted to call out was the social vulnerability index. And that's another priority for our program in particular, because a lot of these other data sets will kind of bias the data to like higher quality habitats and away from the communities of need, which happens a lot in these kind of tributary connections opening up projects, that they tend to be in like the nicer quality habitats, but we want to make sure that we're still doing restoration projects in these urban areas that need work as well. So wanted to highlight those. I started in 2019 and with this subwatershed up here in the lower Passaic and this one over here in the lower Raritan. And in 2020, got a little bit waylaid by COVID, of course, but managed to do one more watershed up here in the upper Passaic with the Great Swamp Watershed Association. And then in 2021, or in 2020 rather, we got a big grant from the US EPA and Restore America's Estuaries, the Coastal Watershed Grant, and we're able to do a whole bunch more and really expand the scope of the project to do these two circle areas right here. So this is a little bit more about the Coastal Watershed Grants. We're awarded $87,000 and plus in-kind match from our great partners at Rutgers University. So the Rutgers University students really have been provided a lot of the legwork in terms of actually going out and doing the assessments in the field. So it was extremely helpful to have that partnership. Project was up over 350 crossings and 11 sub-watersheds. It was pretty labor intensive. And the other thing I wanted to mention was there's a little bit of money also in this grant to really move the project towards the next step. So go from just assessing the area to moving towards the design phase to really do something about these problematic crossings. So there's a little bit of money to work on design and a toolkit. And the results of this should come out in the spring. Here's going into the evaluation methodology. So basically how I get to the prioritized sites. So again, the first thing we do is do the field data from the NAC data for the connectivity assessments. And then, as I mentioned, we put those into the Cornell hydraulic model, and the outputs from that are the maximum storm interval for current precipitation scenarios and future precipitation scenarios. I also used a methodology called the Dendritic Connectivity Index, which I'll go into for in a minute, but the Dendritic Connectivity Index is a kind of a way of looking at the entirety of the watershed and figuring out where you're going to get the most bang for your buck connectivity wise for the fish by prioritizing certain barriers over others. And you can run that for both diadromous and petadromous fish. And then thirdly, I also look at infrastructure conditions. So this is not a very rigorous assessment, but I think it's important, especially for stakeholders, to know which of the crossing structures are crumbling, failing, rotting out, collapsed. So that definitely goes into the prioritization as well. So summer field work, as I mentioned, this is really pretty extensive, involves getting into the rivers and taking measurements and lots of photographs, and you're averaging about 5 crossings a day. So it takes a while and takes a lot of intrepid individuals. Here are some of our results from the connectivity data. So you can see here, it goes from no barrier, which it means that, there's fish and aquatic life can just pass right through, all the way around to severe barrier. And that's basically a full barrier where really nothing is passing under here. So you can see in both of our 2021 and 2022 data, about half of the crossings were in pretty good shape connectivity wise. And a little bit less than a quarter were pretty bad connectivity wise, but the ones that I really like to look at are what you'll see here in the yellow and green, because those tend to be the crossings that are ripe for restoration, because the ones that are really severe often tend to be like things that are buried, streams that are buried under buildings, buried under whole neighborhoods, and really like kind of more of a lift in terms of buy-in to kind of daylight that stream. So really the sites I'm looking for are in the yellow and green area. And again, the NAC data is a publicly available data set. It's really cool. I suggest you check it out. You can just go to, I think it's like nac.org, and you can see all the results from not only my study, but everybody else who's doing it in the Northeast. These are some of the maps that come out of the hydraulic capacity modeling. So you can see over here on the left, what the model does is it kind of makes a little mini, teeny tiny basin-wide watershed for each individual culvert or bridge. So that's what you can kind of see in the breakdown over here. And over here on the right are our results. So you'll see I don't know if you can see if it's too small, but so you see the undersized culverts will be more in the red and orange range, and the ones that are 500-year max capacity are in the dark green. So the dark green ones tend to be around the main stem, which is great. So connectivity is pretty good. And this is the South River and right off the lower Raritan. And then the more orange and the ones with the worst capacity tend to be higher up in the watershed and in these kind of smaller streams. So dendritic connectivity is, it's pretty cool. You can come up with a score for a dendritic connectivity score for each one of the watersheds. And I should say that when we do a watershed, we do every single culvert within that watershed. So we're not looking at just like one certain length of stream. We're doing every tiny little tributary, and that allows us to get to look at the watershed more holistically. So this diagram here is kind of for one of our more complex watersheds, and you can see that the white and light green nodes here are completely passable, and the red ones are not, and the yellow ones are somewhat passable. So that's kind of a diagram of the connectivity. But the DCI score is basically you're taking the kind of passability score that comes right out of the NAC data, the aquatic connectivity data, and then multiplying that by the length of upstream that you could potentially have if that barrier wasn't there. And then you sum that up for the entirety of the system, and then you have your DCI score. And once you have your DCI score, then you can play around with it and say, well, if I upgrade this barrier over here, how does that change the overall score for the whole watershed, or this barrier over here and this barrier over here? So I do that analysis and see what's going to be better for connectivity as a whole. So here are the scores for the watersheds. The DCI score goes from 0 to 100, from no connectivity to completely connected. And you can really tell that the watersheds with the best dendritic connectivity scores tend to be the most branchy ones. So the ones that are more on a kind of a main stem with just a few tributaries off are tend to be the most kind of problematic. And so so these are the 2021 data. I haven't quite finished the 2022 data looking at everything yet. So I had 6 watersheds with the watershed grants that I did in 2021. And part of the outreach for this project is I kind of want to get a determination of the character of the sub-watershed. So some watersheds will have more needs for one type of upgrade, and some will have needs for another type of upgrade. So that's kind of what this diagram is trying to show you right here. I turn the data into kind of an assessment of need for a given watershed. So you can see the different colors are the different watersheds, and some of them need capacity restoration. There's a lot of undersized culverts. Some of them have a lot of issues with the dendritic connectivity index. There's a lot of opportunities there. Some of them just have worse NAC scores than others. And then some of them have more culverts and bridges that need restoration for condition issues that are falling apart. So I've been able to make a fact sheet for each one of these sub-watersheds that I've assessed, not only prioritizing certain crossings themselves, but also kind of giving these kind of characteristics of each watershed. This is another just results slide showing you that this is my overall score on the bottom on the y-axis here, and on the or on the x-axis, and on the y-axis on the right, I have the NAC passability score. And on the left, I have the capacity score. So ideally for this, you'd want a site that it has, it's problematic for fish, and it's problematic for capacity, and it's falling apart, and that would be perfect. And that would definitely be one that I'd recommend. But sometimes, as you can see in these kind of orange triangles I made, you'll get one that's, not so great on an overall, or not so great for capacity, but it's, it really needs help for the fish passage. So the prioritization sometimes takes a broader view of all these and tries to marry all of these needs together, if that makes sense. And this is just a slide of some of the interesting, more interesting culverts and bridges that I've come across. And I must say that there's a lot of dams that you come across when they do these assessments as well, which I don't take into consideration for, like, you can't do the NAC data on them, but I certainly take them into consideration for the connectivity issues. This one up here in the right-hand corner, I think it was particularly interesting because it was a ford, which you don't expect to see on such a big stream. They're mostly like on smaller streams. So that was kind of a surprise. And yeah, I just want to acknowledge EPA again and Restore America's Estuaries for the Great Coastal Watershed Grant. I've been able to do a lot more with that grant and our great partners at Rutgers University. And I also wanted to end with this. You can kind of see my fuzzy giant snapping turtle shot that I took just a couple months ago when I was like 150 foot down this huge culvert that went under the highway. I almost stepped on this massive turtle. So that's about it for me. I'm happy to answer any questions in a bit, and thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Isabelle. I'm going to just transition myself. Is that right, Hillary?
Yes, please go right ahead. Thank you so much, Isabelle. And to the audience, we will be taking questions at the end. If you have any questions for Isabelle, please drop them in the Q&A box that's accessible at the bottom of your screen. And at wrap up, we'll take questions for both of our speakers. So Deanna, your screen is up. You look great. Go right ahead.
All right, thank you. Okay, I'm going to turn on closed captioning just for the fun of it here. So my name is Deanna. I'm the director at the Lake Superior National Estuarine Research Reserve. There are estuaries in the Great Lakes. I wish I had time to talk more about that today, but I'm actually going to talk about some positive trends here at our reserve, and that I think are valuable and that I see happening across coastal organizations and other natural resource groups. And want to share a little bit of our experience, a teeny bit of research, and some very light recommendations, but recognize that I'm just scratching the surface on things that people make their whole career out of. So, okay, here's us at the very headwaters of the largest system of fresh water on Earth, at the headwaters of Lake Superior. There's 30 reserves in the National Estuarine Research Reserve System, and for one of them, there will be another one in Wisconsin soon at Green Bay. So that's exciting for us to have more freshwater friends. Where we are located is in ceded territory that Ojibwe people advocated for a very long time to retain off-reservation rights to hunt, fish, gather, and practice traditional lifeways. And that plays a role in everything that we do on land, from research to education to stewardship. So I wanted to give that context, that Anishinaabe or Ojibwe people have a lot of say in land management here through the Great Lakes Indian Fish and Wildlife Commission. This is our estuary. This is a restored Monoman or wild rice bed. And it's a really amazing and beautiful context that we work in. But if you look at it from space, it looks a lot like all you saltwater folks out there. And we have a large drowned river mouth here, with a very large bay mouth bar across the mouth, natural sandbar. And we don't have salt water, obviously, but we have chemical differences between our bodies of water, and we have really large impacts from the seiche. So it's a different kind of estuary, and I thought many of you might be salty. So see me later if you need to know more about that. Okay, first trend that I want to talk about is relationship-centered learning. This is a practice that requires us to slow down, but we've also found to be really impactful in our education program and our coastal training program, and really across the ways that we work here. So I want to talk just briefly about our Rivers to Lake education program. This is a mentoring-based program that builds relationships between mentors, reserve educators, and teachers over the course of an entire year, starting with, like these teachers in August, a summer institute that immerses them in the watershed. The goal is to integrate place-based learning based on Lake Superior, which is an incredible system, into classrooms in a way that's meaningful and applicable for all of these teachers. And we figure out how to do that through getting to know them and also getting to know their classes. So over the course of a year, both with the teacher and the students in the class, they come to know us. They come to know the processes that we're asking them to learn. So for example, going canoeing in October takes a lot of trust, takes a lot of understanding. October in northern Wisconsin, and takes a lot of skill building over the course of a year. So Phil Fowen, this teacher, really engaged with us to share that with his students, who did some really amazing things. It's just an example. Part of what this is based on is sustainability education. So a couple positive traits of sustainability education that you might want to consider in education programs that you lead include dialogue. So it's not didactic, we're discussing. And through discussing, we develop shared understandings, and the education staff are not dominating that process. They're learning from the perspectives of teachers and students, and that helps build the experience. Another aspect is collaboration. We work together, sort of take apart what we know and put it back together in a way that makes sense for us and our place. And that's continuous through these relationships. It's also authentic, like we bring our real selves to that work, and inclusive. We respond to the people as they are in the context that they're in. The context that they're in, we engage the whole system. So that includes school districts, talking with administrators. It also means that teachers and students become agents of change in their community in small ways, in big ways, so that learning is authentic and matters in a broad way. We also, in that whole system, consider the pressures and the day-to-day realities of teachers and students, including things that happen in their personal lives and might not be associated with administration or standards or structural challenges. Rivers to Lake has been really effective. This quote is just one that I'll share, but learning about the environment around you is a great way to make you feel like you're actually a part of something important. For our disengaged students who feel isolated from others, this could be invaluable. This is from Luciana, the education coordinator, shared this with me from last year. So we're taking these methodologies and applying them in coastal communities as well. And this is Karina Heim, our coastal training program coordinator, working with Natalie Chin at Wisconsin Sea Grant. Folks in small communities who are trying to address climate issues, which for us often are associated with flooding in the upper Great Lakes or extreme storm events, they can feel really isolated. And so Karina and Natalie have just launched a program called Climate Champions that is another cohort model where communities work together with staff over the course of a year to bring the resources that they actually really need through relationship. We also vouch for getting outdoors as a way to build community and build those relationships. So a few recommendations related to relationship-based learning, shared experiences outdoors. You'll find that amongst staff, you'll find that amongst folks who are doing research. When made comfortable for everybody, can really bring groups together and help people get to know each other. Sustained relationships over time, as I've said, and then the space and time to be human. The investment that you make in these kinds of programs is time, but it is a wise investment we've found in terms of changing practice. The second trend I want to talk about is community engagement and restoration. Our community is really grappling with this right now, and so I'm not coming to you with a final product or answers or a fully engaged community, but I just want to share where we're at. Our community events often look something like this. Like, this is our Lake Superior Day celebration. It's really fun. We have chances to talk to people, but they might not necessarily be relationship-based. All of this is happening in the context of a Great Lakes area of concern or a major remediation and restoration undertaking that involves a lot of projects moving very quickly to clean up legacy contaminants through the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. We've found through the sheer speed, volume, and workload of these projects that sometimes community finds themselves at the left side of this engagement continuum from the CDC. They hear about projects, or they may hear about projects. Sometimes they get input, but they certainly aren't leading them. They often don't feel like collaborators, and even involvement is sometimes a stretch. That's a challenge for us in a really land-based community here, where people have a lot of knowledge of the landscape. They have family and historic knowledge about what has happened and what has changed over time. So when they aren't involved, the project loses something and the community is less connected to the land, which is an issue for sustainability. So a small place we've been trying to remedy this is in the Bay of Aloise, right here. This sandbar that goes across is called Wisconsin Point. It's a really culturally important place for Ojibwe people and the community here. And this site lost, you can see in this 1864 map, a lot of wetlands. So in trying to decide what the restoration actions here might be through an Audubon-led project, we have to really talk to people. So this is the Osage Family Reunion. For a couple of years, I've taken maps of restoration plans, and this is the family that is from Wisconsin Point, from the village site at Wisconsin Point, sorry. I've taken maps here to gather their input about how the bay used to be and what they wish for it in the future. I've also done that at the school and at community gatherings. We're not there yet, but this has given us a model of a restoration vision that includes things people really want, like more restored wild rice, more monomen, access in places in neighborhoods that don't have the best access or safe access, and attention to things like duck hunting that are really important in these neighborhoods and in these families. We've worked with something called the Lake Superior Headwaters Sustainability Partnership, which is a landscape conservation design process to create goals and objectives associated with community engagement. We've also done this for environmental justice, but I don't have time to share those today. But they're a really good model. If somebody wants to see them, just let me know. But here's what we want. We want community engagement to be prioritized and valued as essential when we're conducting restoration work. And we want the communities that live with this river, live with this estuary to generate, inform, co-develop, contribute to, and evaluate the actions that are taken in the places that they live. We've got a lot of steps for this. It includes investing time, pausing, investing time. That's a really important thing, and it's often not a slot on our calendars. It includes establishing an advisory council that helps us develop an engagement process, along with a youth advisory council that would connect through Rivers to Lake program. And then accessible means of communicating in the community with things like storytelling and visual and media arts and outreach events. So we're just getting these things funded right now, which is good, but we're kind of venturing off into this new way of working. The third thing I want to talk about is something that I'll just come to humbly, because it's something where we all have a lot to learn all the time, and it requires a lot of listening. And that is supporting indigenous sovereignty. Here it's Anishinaabe or Ojibwe sovereignty, knowledge and lifeways, because land is really important to all of these things. Land and all of the plants and animals that are there. So the estuary, this place itself is called Nagachiwanang, which is in Ojibwe, which is the place where water stops and slows down. And it's a really deep cultural roots. It's the highway forever. It's the place where all the villages were in our area. And so we really have to come to this place with a lot of respect, particularly me as a settler person, and do a lot of listening. So across our programs, education, research, outreach, or coastal training and stewardship, with our monitoring program, we connect with our tribal partners, First Nation partners regularly. And so this is the Rivers to Lake program, spending a day at the Fond du Lac Reservation. We're in Fond du Lac ceded territory here, and learning about monomen or wild rice. But thinking beyond inclusion and opportunities for representation when people have time to do so, I'm going to draw from my friend and colleague, Dr. Kavika Winter, who's the director at the Haia National Estuarine Research Reserve in Hawaii, who talks a lot about biocultural restoration. And I'm just going to read this quote because it was important to me. Biocultural restoration focuses on restoring relationships between indigenous people and their places, as well as between them and the biodiversity that shaped the language and identities of their ancestors. Biocultural restoration is built on the notion that everything in the system is interconnected, as are the problems we perceive and the solutions to them. The problems we perceive and the solutions to them. What I see as a problem from my own window isn't all of the problems. And so I think this concept, when looking at restoration, particularly restoration that's moving forward with a lot of funding at a fast pace right now, is an important reminder that we're not only restoring for a species or or a particular hydrology, we're restoring for the long term for all of us. Another concept that I just want to reference, this also comes from Kavika's work. We have good friends in the reserves, relates to social ecological keystone species. In other lines of research, these are also called cultural keystone species. That is species that have crucial social and ecological function. And so when a species that is this kind of keystone is lost, cultural practices are lost, and ecosystem function is lost simultaneously. It's like a linchpin between culture and ecology. So species like these include top callow or monomen. And I think it's important to consider that species might be significant in ways you don't understand when we're looking at restoration. A way that the reserve, through our coastal training program, this is Karina Heim's work again here, is addressing this a small way, but a really important way, is with a planting guide to help hold our eroding shores together. And this is with the Great Lakes Indian Fish and Wildlife Commission and a group of elders and indigenous plant knowledge keepers working on this together to include language, to include relationships with plants, but also who's got deep roots and who holds the shore together for you. So that'll be coming out next year. Another project that we're running is called NY-NJ Harbor. So we are gathered together around a fire. It's led by Evan Larson in the middle. We're just playing a supporting role in this. It's looking at cultural fire and culturally modified trees within the reserve on those sandbars, and looking at the restoration of cultural fire for medicine and also ecological resilience along Lake Superior. And that's also including with Melanie Montano from the Great Lakes Indian Fish and Wildlife Commission, collecting stories from people so that we can understand how people relate to fire. I'm going to share some links in the chat when I'm done here, but this was a really good article, I thought. It's aimed towards natural scientists in Canada, but I'm just going to kind of end here. So calls to action written by indigenous folks. We call on natural scientists to understand the socio-political landscape around their research sites. So for us, that's within the reserves. What is the socio-political landscape of your place, particularly related to indigenous people? Recognize that's complicated because of the effects of colonialism and removal. But understand that as part of what you are doing in your place. The second one I wanted to share, there's many of these that I'm not sharing, is that we call on natural scientists to recognize that generating knowledge about the land is a goal shared with indigenous people. Think about that. This isn't extra, it's a shared goal. And to seek meaningful relationships and collaboration for better outcomes for all involved, including land and water. And then the fifth one I wanted to share, because I think it's relevant to the audience, providing meaningful opportunities for community members, particularly youth. So for example, in the NY-NJ Harbor project, I wonder what's happening in the closed captioning. That project is involving a lot of youth from the tribal college who are getting or students actually, who are getting some really amazing experiences there too. So that was really considerate of Dr. Larson and Melanie to participate in that science. And I'll share the link in the chat to that article, and I recommend it. I think it's very thoughtful. This is Wisconsin Point. This is that sandbar. Used to be a village. There was a cemetery there. The cemetery was disinterred forcibly and the village was removed. And that the family that had lived there, this is a long history of trying to regain land that was really important to them and their ancestors and the resting place of their ancestors. And through the work of the reservation business committee and a really smart city councilor named Jenny Van Sickle, who is indigenous from Alaska. That cemetery was returned. And what's really amazing for us is that that place, so this is Jenny hugging our friend Mark, who's Mark McConnell, who's one of the descendants of that family at the reclamation ceremony for that land. It's only 0.2 acres, but that may be the first tribally held land within the boundaries of a national estuarine research reserve in the country, which represents, I think, a really important opportunity for accountability and partnership on behalf of the reserve system. So I wanted to share that story and end on it. Feel free to reach out to us at the reserve. I should have mentioned earlier, we're part of University of Wisconsin-Madison Division of Extension, but I mentioned it now, so it's fine. I'll share those links in the chat, and thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Deanna, for sharing all of that. That's some really powerful and important ideas there that I think I know I'm going to be simmering on for quite a while. So thank you very much for sharing that, both of you. And we will now open up for questions. We have about 12 minutes here until the top of the hour for questions coming in. And without any further ado, I will dive right in. The first question I see here is for Isabelle. Isabelle, have you looked at the ownership of any of the restrictions? So these are the crossings that you referred to. They ask, are they primarily state or local or private? So can you speak to that?
Sure. So yeah, you've whoever's asking has correctly identified the immediate next step. So after assessment, you know, you're not going to put any funding into something that's the owner of the property is not going to support an upgrade or restoration for that. So yeah, we have looked at ownership, not you know, across the board of everything we've done, but certainly like in preparation for this next design step. Primarily in the restoration study area I've been working with, the problematic culverts tend to be locally owned or managed by the county. But I have done like the watershed you saw that was a little bit further up in the watershed where it was tend to be like larger property owners, like a little bit more rural area. Most of the barriers in that sub watershed that I did a few years back were mostly privately owned because people had bigger lawns and everybody wanted their own little pond that they made from the streams. So there's a lot of kind of manipulation that way. But yeah, that ownership is definitely the next step. It's very important.
And as you said, most of them are locally owned. Is that sort of a capacity issue or a funding issue? Is there political will to work with you when it comes to restoration?
It's a mixed bag. I think like we've come across some municipalities that are really keen and really receptive of the data, but it's certainly, they're also really busy. You know, a lot of these small municipalities just don't have the time to really kind of take this all in and incorporate it in all their, you know, planning that's already underway. And I think where we found a little bit more inroads is working on the county level with like the county planning divisions and stuff have been very receptive.
Well, that's great to hear. I know capacity is always an issue when you're working with local governments and prioritization. All right, thank you. I got a lot of really positive feedback coming into the Q&A from Vidya to a lot of things you were saying, Deanna. So you've got a very receptive and enthusiastic audience.
Thanks, Vidya.
Next question is for Deanna. What is the best way for groups around the country to establish relationships with local tribes and community groups if they don't already have them? So where to start?
Yeah, it's different in every place. And I think that's important to remember that if you live on this continent, you live in many different nations, even though it's changed. And so I guess advice I would give, and people ask this a lot, is to really make some effort to make face-to-face introductions with people. You can find out whose ceded territory you're in, or who is associated with your place. Sometimes people have been removed, and that can get really complex, but it's not that people are disconnected from the places they came from. So, however, know that there is a lot of capacity limitations for groups that have been under-resourced and marginalized, intentionally so, from land use decisions like these. And so, yeah, it might take a while. Up here, I'm like, take yourself to a powwow and be around, set up your table, talk to people, and make sure you shake hands kind of firmly. But that can be different in different places, and most tribes have a tribal historic preservation office. Those people are very busy, but you can reach out to them. They can sometimes redirect you. Some have education and outreach people. Some have cultural historians, and some have natural resource programs that, you know, for us here, have all sorts of responsibilities as sovereign nations. And so those are some places to start. Be around, be around.
That is always very good advice, to be present and to show up with an open mind. Thank you. Next question for Isabelle. How easily or difficult is it navigating local, state, and federal regulations in densely populated areas when it comes to completing restoration work?
The short answer is, yeah, it's pretty difficult. I haven't dealt with a lot of that because this project is, you know, really just a kind of in its assessment phase. But I think that's definitely, you know, as any other restoration project, and especially with the kind of regulations that you have dealing with the transportation sector. You know, they have their own way of dealing with things. Yeah, I think it can definitely be a time-consuming process. But I also do think I'm hearing more from, like, you know, the departments of environmental conservation and protection, you know, from different states, and also the DOTs are really kind of at least getting a familiarity with the concept of, you know, providing aquatic connectivity, terrestrial connectivity. There's definitely, and a lot of DOTs and stuff are taking on projects on their own in this. So it's varied, but it's certainly, it's a growing concern, and I'm seeing more and more momentum.
Well, thank you, and certainly wish you the best of luck as you continue with this project and get sort of deeper into those issues and the weeds of it, as it were. I wanted to say we've also dropped a few resources in the chat. Deanna comments to make sure when you are initiating contact with people to take gifts, to make a personal contact, and to not rely on email. And I can certainly say that can be a generational thing as well. I have been attempting to work with some seniors in my life and recognizing that while we are all enjoying the benefits of technology here on Zoom, that they are not evenly distributed among the population. And it's really important to keep that in mind and to use the medium that is most appropriate for your audience, not necessarily for yourself. And I also dropped in a link to some references, resources that we have on our website, and that we do have some workshops going on as part of our Inclusive Coast initiative. And so to remind folks that you're welcome to join us there for more information and resources in terms of outreach for your programs. And with that, I think we have hit the end of our questions and we are coming up on the top of the hour. So again, I want to take a moment to thank both of our speakers, Deanna and Isabelle, for the time that you've taken today and the really interesting projects that you've talked about. I think we've all learned a great deal. And in particular, Deanna, your point that we are often talking about salty estuaries, but that our Great Lakes states are very much part of our community, and happily so. So thank you again. And for anyone who has lingering questions about what defines an estuary and how the Great Lakes figure into that, you know where to find her, folks. And again, reminder, our next webinar will be coming up in October. Please do keep on the mailing list and you'll hear more about that. And that early bird registration for our summit is coming up on October 7th. So please make sure to get that taken care of in the next week or two. And with that, ladies, I will thank you again so much for your time and your good words. And thank you to the audience for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for having us. Happy Estuaries Week, everybody.
Yeah, thank you.